I found my wife's dirty secret on an old hard drive. I did a DNA test, and the probability of paternity was 0%. Call me Michael. I'm 36 years old, and for the past 9 years, I thought I was living a pretty solid life. My wife, Jennifer, and I had been married for almost a decade. We had a nice house in the suburbs of St. Louis, Missouri, stable jobs, and we were even starting to talk about having a family. I thought we were happy. I thought I knew my wife. Turns out, I didn't know anything. This story starts on what I thought was going to be just another boring Saturday. Jennifer had left to do what she always did on weekends, shopping with her best friend Rachel or grabbing brunch somewhere fancy. I never asked too many questions about her plans because, honestly, she'd get annoyed and roll her eyes like I was interrogating her. So, with the house to myself, I decided to finally tackle the dreaded spare room. The spare room had basically turned into a junkyard. You know the kind I'm talking about, the place where everything you don't know what to do with ends up. Old boxes, unused furniture, random junk we were too lazy to throw out. It was all there. I figured if I could clean up the mess, maybe we could actually use the room for something, like a home office or a guest bedroom. I was about halfway through digging through boxes when I stumbled across it. An old external hard drive, tucked in a dusty shoebox beneath a pile of random books. I didn't even recognize it at first. It was one of those big, clunky ones we used to have before everything became cloud-based. I blew the dust off, stared at it for a second, and thought, what is this? Curiosity got the better of me. I took the hard drive into the living room, plugged it into my laptop, and started sifting through the files. At first, it was harmless. There were photos and videos of vacations Jennifer and I had taken in the early days of our relationship. A bunch of old downloads, music, movies, memes, stuff that didn't matter. For a moment, it was nostalgic. I smiled looking through photos of us at the beach, laughing, carefree. I missed those days. And then I saw it. A folder titled Bachelorette Night. My stomach did a little flip when I saw the name. I'll be honest, I wasn't snooping. It was right there, mixed in with everything else, and I clicked it without thinking. I figured it would be funny. I'd seen some of the photos Jennifer's friends had posted online years ago. Pictures of her wearing that ridiculous bride-to-be sash and a plastic tiara. I thought it'd be harmless fun, maybe a few cringe-worthy moments I could tease her about later. I couldn't have been more wrong. The first video started out exactly how I expected. Jennifer and her bridesmaids were at some bar downtown. They were laughing, clinking shots, and acting like a group of women celebrating one of their own. Jennifer looked happy, surrounded by her friends, the life of the party. I smiled, shaking my head at how ridiculous they looked in those matching team bride shirts. But then I clicked on the second video, and that's when everything changed. The screen showed a nightclub, dark and loud, filled with flashing lights and booming music. The camera was shaky, obviously filmed by one of her friends. And right there in the middle of the frame was Jennifer. But she wasn't just dancing with her friends anymore. No, she was dancing with a guy, a stripper, dressed like a firefighter, of all things. He was shirtless, oiled up, the whole deal. At first, I thought, okay, it's just some harmless fun. Nothing to freak out about. But as the video continued, my stomach started to turn. Jennifer wasn't just laughing or joking with the guy. She was all over him, grinding against him, running her hands up and down his chest, her face pressed way too close to his. My throat went dry. I sat up straighter on the couch, my heart pounding harder with every second. And then the video cut to something worse. It jumped to a hotel room, dimly lit, blurry at first, but it quickly became clear what I was looking at. Jennifer and the stripper were kissing. No, not just kissing. They were making out, like teenagers who couldn't keep their hands off each other. It was intense. It was deliberate. And it made me want to throw up. I paused the video, my hand shaking on the laptop's trackpad. For a minute, I couldn't move. I just sat there, staring at the screen, my mind racing. I thought, this has to be some kind of sick joke. Maybe it's not what it looks like. But deep down, I knew exactly what it was. My wife, had cheated on me. And she'd saved the video. My thoughts were all over the place. Why would she keep this? Why would she save something like this and let it sit there, hidden on a hard drive for years? Did she forget about it? Did she think I'd never find it? I didn't even hear the front door open until Jennifer's voice snapped me out of my trance. Hey, Mike. I'm back. Did you get anything done in the spare room? I slammed the laptop shut, my pulse still racing. I couldn't think straight. My hands felt clammy, my head spinning. Before I knew it, I was standing in the doorway of the living room, the hard drive clutched tightly in my hand. We need to talk, I said, my voice tight. Jennifer looked up from her shopping bags, frowning. What's with this serious face? I held up the hard drive. I found something. On here. She blinked, clearly confused. What are you talking about? Your bachelorette party, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could feel it starting to shake. The videos. The hotel room. The guy. I saw it all. Her face paled, just for a second, before she rolled her eyes. Oh, for God's sake, Mike. That was years ago. That's what you have to say? I shot back, feeling the anger building in my chest. That was years ago? She dropped her shopping bags and crossed her arms, giving me that look she always gave me when I dared to challenge her about something. It was my bachelorette party, Mike. Everyone does it. It wasn't a big deal. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. Are you serious right now? You cheated on me with a stripper, and you're acting like it's nothing? Her eyes narrowed. You're overreacting. It wasn't an affair. It was one night, and I was drunk. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd act exactly like this. Exactly like this? I repeated, stunned. You've been lying to me for 9 years, and I'm the one overreacting? Jennifer shrugged, clearly done with the conversation. You need to let it go, Mike. It's not like it even mattered. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Let it go? I stared at her, feeling the life I thought we had crumble around me. The trust I'd built with her was shattered, and she didn't even have the decency to feel bad about it. I turned and walked out of the room, needing to get as far away from her as I could. She didn't follow. She didn't call out to me. And as I sat on the back porch with my head in my hands, I realized something awful. I didn't know who my wife was anymore. After that night, things between Jennifer and me were unbearable. She acted like nothing had happened, like I had just thrown some childish tantrum over a meaningless mistake. Meanwhile, I couldn't look at her without seeing that video playing on a loop in my head. Her laughing with him, her hands all over him, her in that hotel room. It didn't matter how many years had passed. I couldn't shake it. The first few days after the discovery were filled with silence. I slept on the couch, and Jennifer didn't seem to care. In fact, she acted annoyed, like I was the one ruining her life. I thought she would apologize, show some guilt or shame for what she had done, but there was nothing, not even a half-hearted sorry. Instead, she sighed dramatically whenever I brought it up and said, "Are we still on this? Mike, you're exhausting." By the end of the week, I was losing it. I couldn't keep walking on eggshells in my own house, so I brought up the idea of separating. I told her I didn't think I could get past it, that I needed time to figure things out. Jennifer didn't cry, didn't plead with me. Instead, she said something that stopped me cold. Fine, if you want to ruin our marriage over something stupid, go ahead. But how about we try counseling first? Counseling. It felt like a lifeline. One last-ditch effort to save what was left of us. Part of me thought that if Jennifer was willing to go, maybe she did care, even if she was too proud to admit it. And honestly, I still loved her. I hated what she had done, but love isn't something you can turn off overnight. I thought maybe a professional could help us make sense of this mess. That's how we ended up sitting in a stuffy beige office downtown, across from Dr. Evelyn Holt, a marriage counselor in her late 50s. She had this calm, grandmotherly vibe about her that made me feel like I could finally talk to someone without exploding. She welcomed us with a warm smile and directed us to sit on a large couch that, to me, felt way too small to share with Jennifer. The first session started simple enough. Dr. Holt asked us why we were there. Before I could even open my mouth, Jennifer jumped in. Michael's been angry and distant, she said with a sigh, as though I was the one ruining her life. He's obsessed with something that happened years ago, before we were even married, and he just won't let it go. I stared at her, stunned. The audacity of this woman. She was already twisting the story to make herself look like the victim. I wanted to jump in and explain what I had found, what she had done, but Dr. Holt gently raised a hand to stop me. "Let's start slow," she said in her calm, even voice. "Michael, why don't you tell me what's on your mind?" When it was my turn, I didn't hold back. I told Dr. Holt everything. I told her about the hard drive, the videos, the hotel room, how Jennifer had hidden it for nearly a decade, and how my trust had been completely shattered. My voice shook as I tried to explain how betrayed I felt, how I couldn't even look at my wife without feeling sick. The whole time, Jennifer just sat there, arms crossed, rolling her eyes every few minutes. When I finished, Dr. Holt turned to her. "Jennifer, how do you respond to what Michael shared?" Jennifer shrugged, completely unfazed. "It was one night. It didn't mean anything. I was drunk, and it was my bachelorette party. Honestly, I don't understand why he's making such a big deal out of this." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I turned to her, my voice rising. "You cheated on me, Jennifer. You kissed another man in a hotel room. That's not nothing." Dr. Holt leaned forward, trying to keep things calm. "Jennifer, do you understand why Michael might feel betrayed?" She shrugged again. "I guess, but it's not like I had an affair. I didn't sleep with the guy. It was just some stupid mistake." Her words felt like knives. She didn't care. She didn't even think what she did was wrong. Dr. Holt must have seen the look on my face because she turned back to me. "Michael, I can see how hurt you are. Rebuilding trust takes time and effort from both sides. Jennifer, are you willing to work on this with Michael?" Jennifer sighed like she was being asked to carry some unbearable weight. "Sure, I'll try. But he has to stop bringing it up all the time. If he doesn't, how are we supposed to move forward?" That was how every session went for weeks. I'd sit there pouring my heart out, trying to explain how much she had hurt me, how I couldn't trust her anymore. And Jennifer would roll her eyes, sigh dramatically, or accuse me of being petty. She never once showed any remorse. If anything, she acted like I was the problem for not being able to get over it. Outside of therapy, things weren't any better. Jennifer started coming home late from work. At first, I didn't think much of it. She said she was grabbing dinner with Rachel or working overtime. But then I started noticing things. She would come home dressed to the nines. Heels, makeup, the works. She'd brush it off as just wanting to look nice for herself, but it didn't sit right with me. One night, she said she was with Rachel, but when I checked Rachel's Instagram out of curiosity, there wasn't a single mention of Jennifer. No photos, no tags, nothing. The more I paid attention, the more I realized how vague her answers were. When I asked where she had been or who she was with, she would get defensive, accusing me of being paranoid or trying to control her. "You really need to stop overthinking everything," she said one night after coming home close to midnight. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe I was just being paranoid because of what had happened, but something didn't add up. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I asked her straight out if she was seeing someone else. Her reaction shocked me. Instead of answering, she completely lost it. She started yelling, tears streaming down her face, accusing me of being cruel and paranoid. "How dare you accuse me of that? After everything I've done to try and fix this, you're still stuck in the past," she screamed before storming off to the bedroom and slamming the door. I sat there on the couch, staring at the wall, trying to make sense of everything. Her reaction didn't feel right. It wasn't the reaction of someone who was innocent. If anything, it made me more suspicious. That night, as I lay on the couch again, I realized I couldn't keep living like this. Counseling wasn't helping. Jennifer wasn't putting in any effort. She didn't care about fixing our marriage. She didn't even care enough to pretend. I was starting to feel like a fool, like I was the only one trying. And maybe, just maybe, I was. Things only got worse after that night. Jennifer and I were barely speaking, and when we did, it was short and tense. She moved through the house like nothing was wrong, like she was just waiting for me to get over it and move on. Meanwhile, I was drowning in suspicion, doubt, and anger that I couldn't shake no matter how hard I tried. Then, one night, Jennifer hit me with news that changed everything. It was a Tuesday. I remember it clearly because we had just finished eating dinner in complete silence. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my half-empty plate, while Jennifer scrolled on her phone like always. I was trying to work up the nerve to say something, anything, about how broken things felt between us. Before I could, Jennifer set her phone down, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "We need to talk." My heart dropped. Usually, when she said those words, it meant another argument about how I was still stuck in the past and wouldn't let things go. I sighed, bracing myself. What now? Instead of starting a fight, she reached into her purse, pulled out something, and slid it across the table. I stared at it for a second before realizing what it was. A pregnancy test? Positive. "We're having a baby," she said softly, watching me like she was waiting for me to jump up and celebrate. I didn't. I couldn't. I just stared at the test, my mind racing. This was supposed to be good news, right? This was something we had talked about, something we were supposed to want. But instead of excitement, all I felt was a crushing weight on my chest. I looked up at Jennifer. "Are you sure?" Her face hardened like I had insulted her. "Of course I'm sure, Michael. I've taken 3 tests. They're all positive." I sat back in my chair, trying to figure out what to say. A million thoughts were running through my head, but none of them felt right. How is this possible? When did this happen? Is this even my child? Jennifer's expression shifted from expectant to annoyed. "Say something," she demanded. I swallowed hard. "I don't know what to say." "This is good news, Michael," she snapped. "We've been trying for this, remember?" She wasn't wrong. Months ago, when things were still okay between us, we had started trying for a baby. Back then, I thought a child might be the fresh start we needed, a reason to work through whatever little cracks were forming in our marriage. But things were different now. I didn't trust her. I didn't believe her. And there was one question I couldn't stop thinking. Is this baby even mine? I didn't say that out loud, of course. Instead, I forced a smile, nodded, and said something weak like, "Yeah, this is big news." Jennifer didn't seem to notice how flat my reaction was. She launched straight into talking about baby names and nursery ideas, pulling out her phone to show me Pinterest boards she had already saved. Meanwhile, I sat there in a daze, barely listening as my mind spiraled. Over the next few days, Jennifer acted like the pregnancy had magically fixed everything between us. She was suddenly cheerful, smiling more than I had seen in months. She made appointments for ultrasounds, started talking about maternity clothes, and gushed to her friend Rachel over the phone about how excited she was. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The timing didn't add up. Jennifer and I hadn't been intimate in months. Ever since I found the videos, things between us had been cold and distant. Sure, we had tried a couple of times in therapy to reconnect, but even that felt forced. Now that I was thinking about it, the last time we had been together didn't seem recent enough for her to be this far along. I tried to play along. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was letting my distrust of Jennifer cloud my judgment. But the doubts were like poison in my brain, eating away at me every time I looked at her. One evening, Jennifer was on the couch showing me an ultrasound photo. "Look at him," she said, smiling. Or her. "It's still too early to know, but isn't this amazing?" I forced a nod, trying to smile. "Yeah, amazing." But as I looked at that tiny black and white image, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if this child wasn't mine? What if all those late nights, all the vague excuses, meant more than I wanted to believe? That's when I started looking into paternity tests. At first, it was just research. I learned that there were ways to test paternity during pregnancy, but they were expensive and required Jennifer's cooperation. I knew I couldn't ask her outright. If I did, she would blow up, accuse me of being paranoid and ungrateful. And honestly, I wasn't ready for that fight yet. I told myself I would wait. If I was right, if the baby wasn't mine, I would have all the proof I needed when it was born. Until then, I would play along and keep the peace. But keeping the peace was easier said than done. Jennifer started acting more and more like everything was fine. She talked about baby clothes, doctor's appointments, and which room we would turn into the nursery. Meanwhile, I was barely holding it together. Every time she smiled at me, every time she mentioned the baby, I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of my doubts. One night, I came home from work to find Jennifer cooking dinner. She had music playing in the background and seemed genuinely happy for the first time in months. She kissed my cheek when I walked in, something she hadn't done in weeks, and said, "Sit down. I made your favorite." I should have felt relief, maybe even joy, that things seemed better. Instead, I felt like I was being gaslit. She was pretending like nothing had happened, like everything between us was perfect again just because she was pregnant. I sat at the table, pushing food around on my plate, while Jennifer hummed along to the music. As I watched her, I felt a deep, gnawing anger start to rise in my chest. She was acting like this pregnancy fixed everything, like it erased the lies, the betrayal, the secrets I couldn't forget. But it didn't. And if this child wasn't mine, it never would. That night, as I lay awake on the couch, I made up my mind. If Jennifer wasn't going to tell me the truth, I would find it out for myself. I just had to wait. The weeks leading up to the baby's birth felt like they would never end. Jennifer acted as if the pregnancy had fixed everything, like it was a fresh start for us. She smiled more, hummed to herself while organizing baby clothes, and filled the nursery with furniture she'd picked out. To anyone on the outside, we probably looked like a couple who couldn't be happier. Inside, I felt like I was living a lie. I went to all the doctor's appointments with her. I held her hand during ultrasounds and nodded when the technician pointed out the baby's features on the screen. Jennifer squeezed my hand, beaming like she didn't have a single doubt in the world. I forced myself to smile back, but every time I saw that grainy image on the monitor, the same question echoed in my mind. Was this baby mine? Jennifer never noticed. She was too busy planning for the future. She spent hours online shopping for tiny clothes, researching cribs, and picking out paint for the nursery. When she finished decorating, she dragged me upstairs to see it. The room was bright and cheerful, covered in soft yellows and whites, with pastel animal prints on the walls. Jennifer stood there, hands on her belly, grinning. "Isn't it perfect?" she asked. I nodded and said, "Yeah, it looks great," even though I couldn't bring myself to care. I knew how hard she had worked on it, but standing there in that room only made me feel worse. I was supposed to be excited. I was supposed to feel like I was preparing to be a father. Instead, I felt like a stranger in my own life. Jennifer's excitement didn't stop there. She posted everything online, photos of her baby bump, snapshots of the nursery, and updates about how thrilled we were. The comments flooded in, full of congratulations and praise for how beautiful she looked. It was all fake. She was painting a picture of a happy life, and I was just a background character. One night, Jennifer was scrolling through her phone, reading the comments out loud with a smile on her face. "Everyone says the nursery is adorable," she said, holding her phone up for me to see. "Isn't it nice to have so much support?" I nodded, pretending to agree. I didn't have the energy to argue. Then, late one night, it happened. Jennifer shook me awake, her face twisted in pain. "Mike," she gasped, holding her belly. "It's time. We need to go." I jumped out of bed, my heart pounding, and grabbed the hospital bag she had packed weeks ago. I helped her to the car, and we drove through the quiet streets toward the hospital. Jennifer groaned with each contraction, snapping at me over every little thing. She criticized the way I was driving, complained about how long it took me to park, and told me I wasn't moving fast enough. I tried to stay calm, telling myself that the stress and pain were making her lash out. We got to the hospital, and the nurses quickly wheeled Jennifer off to a delivery room. I followed, feeling like I was in some strange dream. I stood there, holding her hand, trying to process everything as the hours dragged by. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the cries of a newborn filled the room. The nurse handed me a tiny baby boy, wrapped in a soft blanket. Jennifer was half asleep on the bed, exhausted but smiling faintly. I stood there, holding him, staring at his tiny face. He was so small, so fragile, and for a moment, I felt something close to hope. Maybe I had been wrong all along. Maybe this baby was mine. Maybe everything could still be okay. Then I looked closer. The baby didn't look like me. He had dark hair and a complexion that didn't match mine or Jennifer's. My stomach turned, and that small flicker of hope vanished. I tried to push the thought away, telling myself I was being ridiculous. Babies change, don't they? Their features shift as they grow. That's what everyone says. But deep down, I knew. I stayed silent as Jennifer slept, I didn't have the energy to start a fight. Not here, not now. Instead, I sat in a chair in the corner of the room, holding the baby and trying to figure out what I was supposed to do. I had already looked into discrete paternity tests, and I knew the hospital could offer them. Before we even left, I made the arrangements. I didn't tell Jennifer. I couldn't, not yet. The next few weeks at home were a blur. Jennifer was glowing, completely wrapped up in being a new mom. She posted photos of the baby every day, smiling in each picture as if we were the happiest family in the world. Friends and family left comments about how lucky we were and how beautiful the baby was. Meanwhile, I was barely functioning. I went through the motions, feeding him, changing diapers, pretending to be excited when Jennifer showed me his milestones. But every time I looked at him, I searched for something that connected him to me. Some small feature, a hint of resemblance, anything that would tell me I was his father. I couldn't find it. Jennifer brushed off my distance, calling it normal new dad nerves. She'd laugh softly and say, "You're just tired, Mike. It'll pass." It wasn't tiredness. It was dread. 2 weeks later, the results of the paternity test arrived in my email. My hands were shaking as I clicked it open and read the words on the screen. Probability of paternity, 0%. There it was, clear as day. The baby wasn't mine. My suspicions had been right all along, but seeing it spelled out like that felt like a punch to the gut. My chest felt tight as I stared at the screen, unable to look away. I sat in my car for over an hour, parked down the street from the house, trying to figure out what to do. I thought about the baby, about how innocent he was in all of this. None of it was his fault. But Jennifer had lied to me for months, maybe longer. She let me believe this baby was mine. Let me play the part of the excited father, all while knowing the truth. When I finally went inside, Jennifer was sitting on the couch with the baby in her arms. She looked up at me with a smile. "Hey, you're home." He just fell asleep. I didn't waste any time. "We need to talk," I said, my voice cold and steady. Jennifer frowned. "What now?" I pulled up the paternity test on my phone and held it out to her. "I got a paternity test," I said. Her face went pale. She stared at the screen, her eyes widening in panic. "You tested him without telling me," she said, her voice shaking. "Yes," I replied, "because I needed to know the truth." Jennifer's hands trembled as she put the phone down. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment, she couldn't say anything. Finally, she choked out, "Michael, I can explain." "Explain what?" I snapped. "That you've been lying to me this whole time? That you let me believe this baby was mine when you knew he wasn't?" Jennifer broke down, sobbing into her hands. "It was a mistake," she cried. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It was one night, Mike. I didn't know how to tell you." I stared at her, my anger boiling over. "Who is he?" I asked. She hesitated, avoiding my eyes. "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me," I said. "It matters to that baby." After a long pause, she finally admitted the truth. The father was someone she worked with, a guy she had been seeing during the worst months of our marriage. She tried to justify it, saying she felt neglected, that it was just a mistake, that she didn't think I would find out. But it didn't matter. None of her excuses mattered anymore. I knew in that moment that our marriage was over. After Jennifer admitted the truth, I didn't say much. I couldn't. I just sat there, staring at her as she sobbed into her hands. Everything I had thought about her over the past few months, every suspicion, every doubt, was now confirmed. She had lied to me, betrayed me, and let me believe a child that wasn't mine was somehow going to fix everything. When I finally spoke, my voice came out flat. "I'm done, Jennifer. I can't do this anymore." She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, and shook her head. "You don't mean that, Mike. We can get through this. I know I messed up, but I love you. You're my husband. This doesn't have to end like this." Her words meant nothing. For months, I had been trying to fix things, holding on to a marriage that she had already broken long ago. I stood up, grabbed my keys, and walked out of the house without another word. I needed to get away from her, from the lies, from the mess she had created. That night, I slept at a friend's place. I didn't tell him what happened, just that Jennifer and I were having problems, and I needed somewhere to crash. He didn't ask questions. I spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head. The videos, the lies, the baby that wasn't mine. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I met with a lawyer. I explained everything, from the hard drive and the bachelorette video to the paternity test and Jennifer's confession. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Allison, listened carefully and took notes. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, "You have a solid case here. You've been deceived, and the courts tend to look unfavorably on situations like this. You don't have any legal obligation to the child since the paternity test proves you aren't the father. As for the rest, we'll make sure Jennifer doesn't walk away with more than she's entitled to." Hearing her say those words felt like the first moment of clarity I had in months. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew I had to end the marriage. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of Jennifer's lies. When I went back to the house later that day, Jennifer was in the living room with the baby, rocking him to sleep. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes red and puffy. "Mike," she whispered, "please, let's talk." I shook my head. "There's nothing to talk about. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce." Her face crumbled. "You can't just walk away from us." "From him?" I stared at her in disbelief. "Us? Jennifer, there is no us anymore. And that baby isn't mine. You knew that, and you still let me believe otherwise. I can't forgive you for that." She started crying again, but I couldn't bring myself to feel anything. I was too far past hurt and anger. I packed a bag of clothes and a few things I needed, then left. The house, the life we had built, all of it felt like a lie. Over the next few weeks, things got ugly. Jennifer hired a lawyer of her own, a man who seemed determined to make me pay for her mistakes. She tried to demand spousal support, claiming that she had sacrificed her career for our marriage and the baby. She even tried to argue that because I had acted as the father during the pregnancy, I should be financially responsible for him. I couldn't believe her audacity. She had betrayed me, lied to me for months, and now she wanted me to pay for it? My lawyer shut it all down quickly. Allison was relentless. She gathered all the evidence, the paternity test results, Jennifer's admission, and even proof of her affair from text messages I found on her old phone. When Jennifer's lawyer pushed for support, Allison hit back hard, arguing that Jennifer's actions had caused the breakdown of the marriage and that I had no legal ties to the child. One day, during a court-mandated mediation session, Jennifer showed just how entitled she was. We sat across from each other in a small conference room, our lawyers on either side. Jennifer was dressed like she was attending some high-end event, her hair and makeup perfect. She leaned forward, trying to sound composed. "I just don't understand how you can be so heartless, Mike," she said. "After everything we've been through, you're just walking away and leaving me and the baby with nothing?" I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. "That's because you've done nothing but lie to me, Jennifer. The baby isn't mine, and you knew that. You don't get to act like the victim here," she scoffed, shaking her head. "You've been acting like his father this whole time. You think you can just flip a switch and walk away?" "Yes," I said firmly. "That's exactly what happens when you lie to someone about something as important as this. You broke us, Jennifer, not me." Her lawyer jumped in, trying to argue about emotional bonds and my responsibilities to the child. Allison wasn't having it. She shut them down immediately. "Mr. Reynolds has no legal obligation to this child. Furthermore, your client misrepresented the situation, which could be considered fraud. I strongly suggest we stop wasting time and proceed with the divorce settlement." Jennifer's face turned red, and for the first time, she didn't have a comeback. The turning point came when the court ordered Jennifer to reveal the identity of the baby's biological father. She had been avoiding it for weeks, insisting it didn't matter, but the judge didn't buy it. When she finally admitted the father was a co-worker she had been seeing during the rough patch in our marriage, her credibility shattered. The judge ruled in my favor on every front. I was not financially responsible for the baby, and Jennifer's demands for spousal support were denied. When the divorce was finalized, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in months, I could breathe again. Jennifer, on the other hand, was furious. She stormed out of the courtroom, muttering under her breath about how unfair it all was. But none of that mattered anymore. After the divorce, I moved out of the house and into a small apartment across town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I spent the first few weeks adjusting to life on my own, slowly piecing myself back together. I started going to the gym again, picked up photography, a hobby I had abandoned years ago, and reconnected with friends I had lost touch with during my marriage. Jennifer tried to reach out a few times. She called me one night, her voice shaking as she said, "Mike, I miss you. Can we talk?" I didn't let her finish. "There's nothing to talk about, Jennifer," I said calmly. "We're done." A few weeks later, she showed up at my apartment with the baby in her arms, looking tired and desperate. "Please, Mike," she said. "Caleb needs a father figure. You've always been so good to him." I looked her straight in the eye. "Caleb has a father, Jennifer. It's not me. You don't get to use him to manipulate me into coming back." She cried, but I didn't budge. I had spent too long being lied to, too long trying to fix something that was beyond repair. I had nothing left to give her. Looking back, walking away was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the best decision I ever made. I wasn't responsible for Jennifer's mess, and I wasn't going to let her drag me back into it. For the first time in years, I felt free.